Does it say that it's streaming?
Hang on, let me refresh.
Appreciate your patience, guys. Sorry for the delay. Technical difficulties and all.
Billy's got frickin' 84-degree water. He's still catching fish that count ants. He's still catching fish that count ants. That's my December, January, February trick. About the only time I can catch fish that count ants.
Man, I bring bug spray year round for
I
me.
just told Ronnie, I said, I'm actually going to sit on this one and see if I can learn something about my shallow water nemesis. Billy, if we can get me over that hump, I might go back into the FLW and see if we can make a deal.
So it's offline, Billy.
Huh?
It's offline.
Is it? Was it running for a second?
You're doing a good idea.
Come on in, brother.
Real
It started 2 minutes ago. It just says your top 5, Billy.
I just started a new one. Close out of that one. I closed that one out and started a different
Are
one.
you? Pretty good.
Hang on, we're trying to get all this stuff up and running real quick.
It's okay.
Alright, yeah, I got you.
We up and
Still
running?
not as many fish
Both
as
are
I'd
up and running,
like to
Kev?
Yeah.
see.
I'll say one thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you start.
10, 15
I'm
fish
gonna make
average
sure this
per
live stream's
session.
going.
Yeah.
One second.
They both going?
But I'm not seeing the numbers, the sheer numbers. I'm having schools of 50, 60 instead of 200.
Remember
300.
myths, sir. Far favor.
Both ways.
What that mean?
That's class of fish that he's on right now. What the one little thing on this whole lake, he's on it. If there was a major event right now, that would be your winning class of fish. It's a whole different
No
fish.
picture?
It looks different.
No.
Completely suntan fish.
Facebook's
It's just
rolling
a-
Yeah.
Anything at 82 degrees and they'd be out of there.
He has found the option different
Put it
places.
on the airplane mode
Completely
too.
different
Right here for the
lifestyles.
seminar?
I've got 4.
Come on, we'll
Kevin, I'm just gonna go. Man, we're just gonna go ahead and go.
that light, that bright light, is that just the way it is?
That's just the way it is. Best we can get on the lighting. His is better than mine because it has a downward angle. Go ahead when you're ready, sir.
Okay, here we are
Hey,
again,
here we are.
Lake Fork Seminar, Lake Fork Circular Seminars again, led by Billy Lawson, but we've also got, here comes some more, we got a great turnout tonight. I'm particularly appreciative of the 3 youngsters tonight. And 2 of them were brought by their moms, which is even more impressive. So we're honored to have these every other Friday night, and we appreciate you coming. And Billy's going to turn loose of some, he's already leaked it to me, he's going to turn loose of some really private, little release information tonight. So hope you enjoy it. Thank y'all for coming, okay?
Billy, it's on there.
How you doing? How's everybody? Good. Thank y'all for coming out once again. Really appreciate it. Those of you that were here 2 weeks ago heard me talk about how bad I was struggling and this and that and the other, and talk about keeping a positive attitude, just trying to think your way through it, and keep grinding and keep grinding. Literally the very next day I found something that I've been fishing nonstop for 2 weeks, and we've been really catching them. So you never know when it's going to turn around. I stuck true to what I know how to do, and I found it, and we've been catching them good. So I'm going to talk about a specific technique that I've never put on camera. You guys have never seen it on the Your Lake Fork Guide YouTube channel. I've never talked about it in public. There's just a couple guys around the lake, and they compete for, they're right, if they don't win Angler of the Year, they're really close to it a lot of the time on some of these smaller tournament trails, JC, Media, and such as that. And I was taught this by one of them, and I made sure he was okay with me telling y'all. I do it a little bit differently than he does, so he's okay with me telling y'all this technique. And this will get you probably more numbers than anything else you can do in the summertime. And that includes deep water. You can literally catch more fish up shallow doing this than you can on the best deep water bite that I've ever experienced on fork in the summer. It catches a lot of small fish, that's true, but for tournament fishermen, the unders are good. But, as Mike can verify by some of the pictures from today, if you guys follow the Facebook page, the Instagram page, you'll see this bait right here, literally this piece of plastic hanging out of the mouth of pretty big fish. So we catch some giants on it too. It just looks like, a weightless, this is the LFT magic shad. Not live magic shad, but regular old magic shad. No swim slots, kind of like a fluke style bait, weightless. The important part for this technique, and this is actually, I need to get better hooks for this because I'm having to kind of milk it to get the technique right with this heavier hook. But what you need is a 3/0 thin wire EWG hook. This bait doesn't quite float, but it almost floats with a 3/0 thin wire hook. Very important. This bait, the difference in this bait and most of the other fluke style baits is that tail. the shape of that tail, that broad, wide tail. Show the cameras up here. That tail is the key, because what we're doing with this bait is completely different than how you would normally fish a fluke style bait. We are walking this bait like a Zara spook, but it's weedless. So we're fishing shallow grass. Everybody knows if you're going to fish shallow in summer, you need grass, right? Shade, oxygen, bait, love it, all that good stuff. Well, we all know that spooks work tremendously well in the summer. That's a summertime staple, topwater bait, low light conditions, windy conditions, they always bite a spook. Well, how on earth can you fish a spook with a bunch of treble hooks hanging off the bottom of it over a grass mat? You can't. This is kind of the answer to that, because that bait right there with that broad tail and the flotation that it provides with that 3/0 thin hook, you can actually throw that bait and twitch it, and it will. You don't want to twitch it real fast, it's just boom, 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 ever so slow, and that bait's just going boom, 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 snapping back and forth. That tail kicks a little bit and it flutters. Tail kicks a little bit and it flutters. And you can literally do that right over the top of grass. And you see, it's a visual thing. You see the fish boil on it, eat it most of the time. It just catches so many fish, guys. Try it out. So more in depth on how I'm doing it, the setup that we're using, because this is all very important. These factors are all very important. The rod, you want to throw it on the same rod that you would throw any weightless plastic on your Senko, whatever. For me, that's a Limit 5 series rod, 610, medium heavy. That's the rod that I use for my weightless stick baits, flukes, wacky worms. That's the rod that I'm using. Make sure you need a pretty good quality reel for this on a bait caster. You could throw it on a spinning setup. I don't like to, because you're dealing with big fish and heavy grass cover. That with a spinning rod can equal some disaster. But you got to have a good bait caster to throw that light of a bait and be able to make long casts with it, which is important as well. For line, this is the most important part to me, is the line. And this may shock some of you. 12-pound mono.
Mono.
12-pound mono. Mono for flotation, because this is almost a topwater type technique. Braid, the guy that actually taught me this technique uses and swears by a 20 or 30-pound braid. For me, I've found that when I do it with braid, because there is zero stretch in braid, and we do have a thin wire hook, and they're eating this bait off the top of grass, so they don't always get it the best. We all know how often we miss frogfish and all that around grass. When you have that no stretch factor, you don't have any shock absorption, man, you lose a lot of fish. A lot of them come unbuttoned on the way to the boat, right? So that's where this 12-pound mono comes in. The 12-pound, the light line, the thin diameter is very important for the action of the bait. If you have too much line, it will not walk the right way. It'll kind of kick around to the side and kick around and go down. It will not do that walking that we're looking for. So 12-pound mono. Simplest, cheapest line you can buy. Easy to throw, but that's exactly what works the very best for this technique. Other big factor that you got here. When you set the hook on these fish, you want to drill them. You'll see them bite a lot of times. You want to check them up, make sure they've got it, and bring it home. But at that point, stop. Because that fish is going to be 9 times out of 10 balled up in grass. If you try to horse him with a 3/0 thin wire hook and 12-pound mono, he's gone. You ain't going to get him through there. All you're going to do is wad him up worse, and he's going to get away. He's going to have all the leverage to tear that little thin hook out. So I set the hook as hard as I can, and I just stop. And I literally let that fish sit there and pump and pump and pump, and he will work his way out of that grass. He doesn't want to go, his head's in it already. He doesn't want to go into it. He's trying to get away from it. And if you'll let him, he'll lead you away from it. And then once he gets out there, just like you're fishing a Texas rig or anything else, you get him to the boat, best you can. You got 12-pound line, working. Excuse me. Come on, Nance. Yeah, work him, play him out, do what you need to do to get him through that stuff with that 12-pound line. But that's very important. That line, 12-pound mono, set the hook hard and just wait. And let him pump his way out of that grass. As far as colors go, today I was using the albino shad color. The fish that we were looking at today, they were really, really, really keyed in on specifically on shad. You could see them chasing the shad and busting the shad, and shad scattering out of the water. So the albino shad was the color today. Most of the time, I like a watermelon type of color. Watermelon red, just a kind of a translucent light something that looks natural, but they can't really get a very good look at, that's what I want to go with most of the time. But when they get really keyed into specifically shad, albino shad is hard to beat. Little blue, little white. Wow, that was really fast. That was not a Mike McFarland seminar right there.
Keep going, cause he's working on the machine now.
That's right. Oh, he's back there on the machine. Yeah, I know I gotta keep going. But yeah, that's the technique. I'm trying to think if I miss anything else before I open it up for questions. I guess let's go ahead and open up for questions when I think of something like that. Go
I
ahead.
guess would you lose action if I've seen flukes with that sliding swivel? Would you lose the action if you did
Yeah,
two?
no. Yeah, that's a no-go on this.
Okay.
Yeah, this is completely different than your typical fluke. This is nothing like how you would normally fish a fluke. I don't want that swivel in there because that's going to add weight, which is going to take away from my ability to keep that bait up and walk it. It's going to pull on that bait when I'm pulling it, and it's going to want to pull straight forward. Go ahead.
Slack line like a jerk bait?
Yep. So it's just like walking a spook. It's just slower. The bait moves a little slower than a spook would. It doesn't react quite as quickly on the walk because it's not really made to do that. So slack line just like a spook, but just at a slower pace. Instead of boom, boom, boom. Just hesitate a little bit more. Like if you were barely walking a spook and it was going like this, that's how you gotta do it. So you gotta pop that slack, hold that rod. If nobody knows how to walk a bait, we'll go over that right now real quick. That's a great question, good point. When you go to walk a bait, you make a cast out there, you want to point your rod. If my line is at the back corner of that room, I want my rod to be pointed at this angle. I think that's 45 degrees. When you make a direct L, right? That's how you want your rod, pointing at. You want it pointing directly perpendicular to your bait. You want to leave a little bit of slack, and you snap that slack. But when you snap it, you immediately point your rod back at it. So it's, see how I'm working that rod and it's bouncing back. That's important to bounce it back because when you pull on it, that bait's going to come to you, and then when you feed it that slack, that's what kicks it to the side when you point back at it. So pop it and point it, pop it and point it. Just tickling the end of that slack, snapping it, letting it loose, snapping it, letting it loose. Any more questions? Who else? Who's next?
Preference on size of the bait?
This bait here, the LFT one, is the one that I use for that because of the flotation and the shape of the tail is what makes it work. And it only comes in one size. So, yeah, that size. That's my preference. The only one that I know that they make. What else?
What is that bait called?
It's called the magic shad. There's it's a little bit confusing because we have the live magic shad, but this is just magic shad. No swim slots.
It's the old original,
The
back
original,
in the day.
the OG magic shad, you could say.
So that pattern's working right now, but when do you think it would actually start working in the season?
Well,
How soon would you start?
so here's the deal. This can be somewhat of a year-round pattern, but not so much in the wintertime because we all know in the wintertime they don't really chase as much, right? When they're entanglements, those other things. So other than the wintertime, for me this is shallow grass, clear water, and I can visibly see them waking and chasing bait. If I see bait scattering at the surface and shad popping out of the water or brim, and I see the wakes of the fish chasing them through those grass flats, it's time for that.
Doesn't matter the time of day.
No, I mean, this guy was fishing yesterday on a different lake, but same kind of deal. They were literally schooling on bait at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
Good.
So,
Videos up.
huh?
Videos up, please.
Okay.
This one up.
All right, we'll work on that when I get done. Yeah, no, time of day does not matter necessarily. It does not have to be low light condition for this. So here's the deal on that. People think low light conditions for top water, right? Low light conditions for top water. Anytime fish are in 4 foot of water or less, top water is a viable option because a bass, we all know, has a very foul attitude at times. And when he gets ready to eat, you can't stop him. I don't care what you throw, he'll eat it. Well, when they're in 4 foot of water or less, that top water is in their zone, right? Like it's close to them. It's within a few feet of them. Sometimes it's within inches of them if they're swimming up high, which they do a lot in the summer. Very, very often in the summer. Just like as we get into July and August, we all know that offshore structure fish suspend, right? We all know that. That's a common known thing. Shallow fish do the same thing. they don't do anything different. I mean, they get up off the bottom too. They get up high in the water. And the reason that is moving water. So here's your two most important factors to figure out where to fish this. The two most important factors are water clarity and wind current. If you can find the clear pocket of water, that is where the majority of fish in a given area will be every single time in the summer, guaranteed. Wind current is your best friend because clear and moving water is colder than still or dirty water. No matter what. No matter what time of year it is. In the wintertime we look for dirty water because it warms faster, right? It warms faster in the summer too, so we go away from it. Same deal. And another thing too, guys, I'm fishing shallow, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm not fishing a bank. I'm nowhere within casting distance of a bank. I'm offshore structure fishing too. My offshore structure is in 4 foot of water, 5 foot of water, whereas Mike's is in 20 foot of water. I'm looking for the same things. I'm using creek channel bends that make points. I'm looking at points that run way out with grass on them. They come to a point. I'm using all the same stuff, a hump out in the middle that creates a flat in that same depth range at 4 foot, 5 foot of water. I'm fishing all the same stuff that everybody else is. I'm just fishing it in shallower water. The fish tend to use the same stuff the same way. It's just some of these areas you get back into, there's not a deep water option. You're so far back in an area, if the creek channel, the bottom creek channel is 10, 12 foot, where are they going to go? If it's 1.5 miles to 20 foot of water, where are they going? These are resident fish that live here all summer. And so, they don't have an option, but they still are bass. And a bass is a bass, no matter where he's at. He's going to relate to the same stuff in a given time of year. I'm kind of talking in circles. I hope that makes sense because it's very, that's some pretty in-depth stuff that took me a very, very, very long time to learn. That just because you're fishing shallow doesn't mean you're not fishing offshore. How many times have you watched a Bassmaster or FLW tournament and seen the bank right next to the guy's boat? Not very often. Who remembers the New Orleans Classic with KVD? Everybody remember that? When they were on the New Orleans, Delta, Bayou, whatever, fishing out of New Orleans, they're fishing on the backwaters of the Mississippi River, right? He was fishing offshore. He was out in the middle of one of those flat lakes out there that has no deep water. Now he was fishing offshore structure and, timber and old cypress tree roots and stuff like that, way out in the middle. And he was in 4 foot of water, but he's fishing offshore. You almost never see the guys that win on those big tournaments fishing next to the bank. But you oftentimes see those guys fishing in less than 10 feet of water. It doesn't have to be deep to be offshore structure. Do you have a question?
I guess if you don't get a quick hook set and you choke it, are you finding yourself retying a lot
Yes.
with its ball line?
Yes. If they get that bait deep enough, a lot of times they don't because you see them hit it and you set the hook, right? So a lot of times you get them in the corner right in the top. If they do get it deep enough to where they put their teeth, if their teeth have touched that line at all, you need to check that. If there's abrasion on that line, yes, retie. It's just 12-pound line. It will break. Any more questions? It's a 3/0. All right, good coordination. So you want to use a 3/0 thin wire, EWG. This is a heavy wire. I need a thin wire. I've got the wrong hook on here. That's the original Magic Shad. Just the old EWG hook.
Put it on the Facebook too.
You got any questions coming through over there, Kev?
No.
Y'all ask questions. YouTube.
That was the question that I had.
There we go. All right. Anybody else? Ask me a question about something else. Anything you want.
like that better than just plain old fluke?
Yeah, absolutely. For this, it's the only one that works for this. The other fluke will not walk. Yeah, right? Hey, we're at the Lakeport Tackle Store, Doc. Come on. No,
I got all these flukes at home.
hey, I've come in here plenty of times to talk about other baits and techniques. On this technique, this is the deal, and it's the tail shape, and this bait just floats that hook better. A regular zoom fluke will sink more, and it will not do that walk because the tail shape's not right. That wider tail holds it up and makes it walk.
It almost glides, doesn't it? Just a little. Like
Yeah.
You pull it right, it has that, yeah, I can see it happen.
It's just like a glide baby. You can't work it fast.
I
It's
can picture it
exactly
happening.
like a
Has
glide
that,
baby.
yes.
Yeah, it goes.
Yes, I've seen the bait do that before.
Yeah.
So you're intentionally doing that
You're
now.
saying that people are asking length and flex of your rod?
Length and flex. The rod that we're using for that is the Limit Series 5 Series rod, 610 medium heavy. My YouTube people. Anything else? Anything else?
Somebody wants you to sing David Allen Cole.
I think there's a lot of David Allen Coe songs that would not be YouTube nor LFT approved. So we're gonna hold off on that. Plus the factor of me singing it probably would not be the greatest idea ever. Yes, sir.
I guess if it hasn't rained in a while, is there underwater current in those creek channels? Is water-
Absolutely. Not underwater current in the channel, but wind current. Wind current is the deal. Yeah. So if there's no wind and there's no flow, this is not really a technique that I'm going to look to. I'm going to go to a wacky worm on the edge of the matted grass, or I'm going to punch. It's probably going to be my first two things that I go to. Yep.
Is there any one kind of vegetation better than another, or?
I think the fish use whatever's available. I think in a situation where multiple vegetations are available, especially for summertime, if we're talking about submergent vegetation, hydrilla, better than anything else, it's not even close. They like it better. It creates a better canopy. If you look at a hydrilla stem that's long, it has 0 leaves on the bottom part of it. It really creates a good canopy, whereas a coontail doesn't really create as good of a canopy. It's a little more soft. It kind of folds down on itself on the mat. It doesn't really create that crisp mat. So I think the fish really like to relate to hydrilla better. Now, hyacinth is kind of the golden ticket. It can be because it's completely hollow. There's no roots. It doesn't grow to the bottom. The problem with hyacinth is it doesn't put off oxygen, and that's a big factor in summer, right? So I love hyacinth. It's my favorite plant to punch of all. It's my favorite plant to fish around in the summer of all because it is completely open. But I have to have that other grass with it. If I don't have coontail or hydrilla or something to put off oxygen, milfoil, if I don't have some type of submergent vegetation putting off oxygen around that hyacinth, then it's not very good in the summer. There's no oxygen in that water, and those fish, even if they are there, they don't feel very good. They're not going to bite very good.
What about lily pads?
So lily pads are just like hyacinths. You know, they're hollow, more hollow. They do have a stem, but they're more hollow. They do not put off oxygen for the fish. So same thing. I like lily pads in the summer. If you have a lot of wind current that creates oxygen or other grass that create oxygen, lily pads are great. If you don't, lily pads are good in the morning and good in the evening, and the rest of the day pretty much not any good.
How deep can you expect to find grass?
On Lake Fork, there's some grass out in 12 foot of water. Yeah, there is some grass going out 12 foot of water. Now, for the pattern that I'm talking about, what I'm fishing, the grass, most of the area that I'm focusing on is 4 to 6 foot. There are some pockets of really clean water behind it that are in 2 foot or less. I am fishing some water less than 2 foot. But the grass, as far as how deep you can expect to find it, depending on the area you're in, we have grass all the way up to 12 foot this year. There's really good grass this year. Best grass we've had on Fork in a long time. It's just not everywhere. You got to hunt it down. It's not all over the lake like it used to be.
Work on most other East Texas lakes, and does it have to be shad color?
No, I typically do prefer actually a watermelon seed or watermelon red color. If they're so zoned in on shad where you do see them actually chasing the shad, you see shad flying out of the water, that's when I go to that shad type color. And will this pattern work on all East Texas lakes? If you have the grass, if you have the factors we've talked about, absolutely. This pattern does travel. It's a summertime pattern, not just East Texas, but literally across the country. When you get hot water and you've got grass and shallow fish living in it, this pattern works. Any more?
Finding the fish, and how do you know they're you're just searching with a bait?
How do you find fish in the grass?
Yeah, I mean,
That's
you
next
know
week's
there's
seminar.
grass there, but I mean,
That is a very
because really you can't graph it.
no, you can't. Yeah, it's how do you find fish in grass? Because here's the deal about grass fishing. when you have good grass and you have acres and acres and acres of it, typically those fish are in a spot, 2, 3, 4 spots. They're not all over it. Maybe you catch some stranglers here and there, but for the most part, the fish are going to be schooled up just like they are, like we talked about. We're offshore structure fish.
Spot within the spot.
They're going to be just like those deep fish are. They're going to be in one spot. And they're going to come to that one spot to feed, and then they're going to go up under that mat and bury up in that grass to not feed when they're not wanting to feed. The difference is that's a lot closer when you're dealing with grass than offshore. How do you find them? For me, it's about bait. Okay? We're not talking about glass minnows. It's all about bait. You know, we're looking for clear water. Clear water you can see through. I wear amphibia sunglasses. This is the Baja colored lens. It's like an amber color. They call it Baja in amphibia. Very, very important tool for me. Very, very, very invaluable tool for me because I look into that water and I'm not looking for bass. I see them sometimes, but I'm looking for what kind of bait is there. The lake me and Justin fished yesterday, there was brim beds. We were literally going through all this grass, and it's like miles of grass, right? Like miles of it. And I'm going through on the trolling, and we're like, oh God, we're not catching anything. This is terrible. Where are they at? I know there's fish in this grass. Where are they? All of a sudden, I see this brown spot, like this giant brown spot about as big as a kitchen table. And then I go, there's little fish darting across it. What did I say? Brim beds, we're fixing to catch them. Like, that's how you find them. You find the bait. And we're not talking about little minnows. Those little minnows are all over that grass. The little tiny shad, little minnows are everywhere. We're talking about gizzard shad and brim. When you find those, there are big bass. I mean,
Not far away.
yeah, they're going to be, and sure enough, we started seeing those brim beds, and then all of a sudden we started seeing fish blowing up on stuff. And then we started catching some fish.
It's almost, sorry to say it this way, it's almost like an alcoholic being right next to the bar.
Yeah, it's not going to work out too good. It's not going to work out too good. Yeah, so that's the deal. The bait fish tell you everything you need to know, and the bait fish show themselves a lot more than the bass. So on the day when the fish are inactive and the bait fish aren't really showing themselves, man, it's tough. It's tough to really dial them in and find
I
them.
guess that's what my question was. I mean, it's pretty obvious to follow the bait, but if there's no bait activity.
So where do you
can't find
start?
it.
Where
So
do you
I
start,
guess
right?
I guess you just,
So where would I start?
I'd
so-
just start searching.
There's a few.
Can I ask you one question for?
Sure.
It's about the wind direction. If the wind's coming from south, are we looking for that, we look for the north bank, or does it matter?
Not the northern bank, but the northern side structure. So let's talk about this for just a second. So where do I start when I start to pick apart a grass flat? I want to look at the creek channel bends, the points, the different elevation changes. So I'm going to get on my map. And most of the time when you're dealing with shallow stuff, most of your elevation changes are going to relate to the creek channel. The creek channel is going to make a bend, right? Well, what that bend creates a point. And then this other bend creates another point. So when we're talking about a southern wind, I want to look at where that wind is blowing across those. And I want to see where, just like on
So
deep
that's what I meant, is it gonna push the bait into the, I mean, if it's on one side of the creek or another,
Right. Yeah,
so
so,
back to where he's pointing, I mean, do you start, let's say you got the north side of the channel, or the creek, or the south side of the creek, am I gonna eliminate half of it and focus on the
sure. So if you,
inside?
yeah, so if you've got a creek, especially if you've got a creek, let's say you've got a creek that runs east to west and you got a south wind blowing, then so you've got a south bank and a north bank of that creek, then yeah, I'm gonna fish more on the northern side. I'm gonna look for the structure on the north side, absolutely. I want the wind current, I absolutely
Well,
want.
that's why, that's what.
Yeah, I wanna be in wind current 100% because like we said, that moving water is always gonna be cooler than that still water. And that's a big factor. They will migrate to that, bait fish will migrate to that, bass will migrate to that, they'll all go. But even in a little more in depth on that, where you've got those points, just like if you had an offshore point and the wind was ripping across it, you would fish the breakwater side, right? The side where the current's breaking over. That's where you would start fishing. We're gonna do the same thing here. So if you got a creek channel swing and the wind's blowing across it, I wanna fish the ledges where that wind's coming over, the little elevation changes. Maybe it's a grass point that comes out that wind's coming over. You wanna fish that where that wind's breaking, creates that little eddy in that wind current. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Did that answer your question at all? he's watching the cat. He's watching the cat. We got extra entertainment here at Lake Worth Town. Did I answer your question at all? Yeah. So, to start out, you got to focus on the structure. So anytime that you're overwhelmed, whether it's timber, whether it's grass, I tell people this all the time on Lake Fork. If you go to a lake and you're overwhelmed by a certain type of structure, then stop what you're doing, quit paying attention to the cover and focus on the structure. Like if you go to Lake Fork and you say, wow, where do I start fishing all these trees? Don't look at the trees. Where would you fish if there were no trees in that lake? Where would you fish that grass flat if there was no grass on that grass flat? That's where you start every time. And then you go from there. Because they're still going to relate to that structure. All right. I think that's my time. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. I know I don't articulate it the best sometimes. I try. I'm certainly not an educated man, but I just go fishing every day. So I'm going to bring up Mike McFarland. You ready, Mike?
Yes, sir.
All right, buddy.
All right.
You don't have video, Billy.
Okay, thanks.
No video?
On mine, go ahead. You're good, buddy. Go ahead.
You got it on the Facebook, Mike.
Okay. Well, welcome, guys. I'm Mike McFarland, McFarland Fishing. I know I see some familiar faces here. Good to see you back. First thing I want to do is, I wasn't quite ready for a real big, extravagant deal today, so I'm going to do a little bit of talking about what I'm doing right now. Talked about, obviously, offshore. I'm going to expand a little bit of some things on my sonar interpretation. I'm going to be teaching about sonars. Really going to get into depth. It's probably going to go as long as you guys, as long as there's content for me to give, I'm going to keep giving everything from reading your sonars, setting your sonars, even mapping, even navigation, running trails and things like that. How do I follow a trail, or how do I run a road bed that's way up in glade and 5 feet of water by the hair of my chin? How do I follow that trail on the graph? So I want to use this as just an opportunity to invite you definitely to the next few seminars that are going to be coming here. If you want to learn something about sonars, we're going to get in some really, really in-depth stuff that a lot of guys don't even realize that sonars are being used for. Okay, so the bite right now, same old bite. It's just going to get better and better. As some of you saw me before I talked, I'm an offshore fisherman, no doubt. And right now the offshore fish is really good. Typically, as the water gets hotter and hotter and hotter, those fish that are shallow tend to leave. Not all of them, but you get a migration of fish that leaves the shallow water. They can't hold or sustain enough oxygen or enough food for all the fish. So right now I would guess it's 50-50. There's a lot of fish in the shallows. You still can catch big fish in the shallows. It's getting less and less as it gets hotter. If you don't have something not really specific like Billy has, it's not everywhere on the lake. In fact, what he does have is probably an elite winning deal right now for the time, but it's in one spot. You can't replicate it anywhere else on the lake. It's a pretty big area. The offshore stuff is expandable all over the place. There's 100 spots. So you have more fish, but again, as I said, he's on a class of fish. If you look at pictures of offshore fish right now, they're white. They have sores in some cases. They're post-spawn fish that are still recovering. If you look at the pictures of Billy's fish that he's catching in the shallow grass, they are healthy. They're suntan, means they're dark. They're really dark. I mean, a lot of sun. They look like they come from a whole nother lake. They're a different class of fish, acting completely different than all the rest. They may or may not even be residential fish. They're just still, it's a quality deal. But my bite is typically running about 14 to 18 feet right now. I'm fishing main lake points. I'm fishing humps, long structures, ledges, creek bends, treetops. Any structure that I can find in a 14 to 16 to 18 feet that has a flatness to it, like a table, like a kitchen table. Sometimes it's no bigger than this room. That is what I'm actually out trying to find, what I call a setup. Okay, the setup means the fish are there, they're haystacked, they're packed, stacked together, they're doing something. When the bass on the graph look like a haystack, usually that means they're grouped up, they're ganged up, they're ready to do something. When they're spread out, they may not be doing anything. So I look at that structure, and if it looks right, like I want to, we're going to fish it. If it doesn't look right, I continue moving on, and I continue hopping the spots until I find the right setup. Sometimes that can be really frustrating. What's happening that I've noticed over the past couple of years on Fork is that I grind through that hour or 2 hours. We tend to look for 2 hours before we find the setup. Well, in that 2 hour time, it's appropriate. That's what you got to do. It's just like deer hunting. You have no deer, you keep trucking, you keep hiking. Well, I got to thinking about it. I thought, man, some of these fish that I'm trying to find in the kitchen, set up, they've got to be close by. Anybody in the past seminars that I've given, I've talked about bedrooms and kitchens. Okay, well, I finally, really, I think I've crested the bedroom. If I can give an example of a long point coming out, let's use Wolf Point, okay? Wolf Point comes quite a ways, all the way out to the buoy line, okay? When you get out there, you have a lot of different areas in 14, 18, 22 little flats that create a table, a place that the fish can push up on or feed on. Those are the setup spots that I'm looking for. Well, ironically, immediately adjacent to those, usually within about 50 yards, you're going to have just some basic contour. There's nothing to it. There's no structure to it. It's just a long point comes out like this and dives in the deep water. Well, adjacent to it, it's just a nice straight contour. Simple contours. What I found is that when I'm not finding the setup, I'm not finding the fish set up on those points or on that structure feeding, I'm backing off just a little bit more, about 5 to 10 more feet, puts me at about 22 to 28 feet, and I'm running the contour, okay? So here's the key to running the contour. My numbers have gone up because I've done this, but if you fish, if this black line here is the contour, it's the 22-foot line. If I approach that from this angle and I throw this, I throw up into 10 feet and I work the bait, by the time the bait gets there, it's in that strike zone for a mere few seconds. You with me? Is everybody with me? So if this was the 22-foot contour line and I'm fishing perpendicular to it and I throw up in it, as I start to work that jig or worm off, it gets in the strike zone. It only spends about about 5 seconds, 10 seconds, depends on how fast I'm moving it, in the strike zone, and then it's past the strike zone and coming back to me. Okay? So when I'm fishing the contours, I'm turning the boat and getting parallel with the contour. And I have the guy in the back throw off the back, and I have the guy in the front throw off the front. Now the baits are dragging through the fish the entire time. I have 100% efficiency on my presentation of the bait in those inactive fish, and it's working. I'm not killing it during that time, but that's adding my fish. So I'm having 2, 3, 4 fish, a couple here and there, and then when those fish make the move to the feeding ground, then we hammer on them. So it's making my days really healthy, really fat. Being able to catch those fish that are really not there to eat, they're suspended, they're relaxing. Some of them are on the bottom, some of them are cruising around. But they're out there in those contours, basic shoreline contours, in 22 to 28 feet. I'm still throwing 3/4 ounce Sandtone jigs. I'm still throwing the 12-inch power worms. Sometimes when I have used, I'm downsizing to trick worms and things like that because we're catching more fish. Other than that, that's really the gist. It's still what's going on now. It's going to get better and better and better. There's something else that I've been working on. Does anybody know what it with the KVD? I'm having an old man moment. The fish sounder that he has, your KVD
Hydrowave.
Okay, I've been experimenting with it probably for 3-4 years, tinkering on and off with it. I've seen some moments where I believed it. I know a lot of fishermen don't fish without it, but I've never ever truly had a scenario, or more than one scenario that worked for me. I've never been able to look anybody eye to eye, and that's who I am. I'm very much an eye to eye, have conviction when I say something. I believe it wholeheartedly. I do not share it with you if I don't. For the first time, I have put 100%, 99.9% faith in what I'm doing with my Hydrowave. I also have a green light. How many people know about the green lights on the boat? On boat
I thought you was keeping that a secret.
Well, I'm just letting the cat out of the bag right now. The how-to, what I'm doing, this is the whole idea, is I want this to get viral, and I want people to come out with me and see how it is that I'm using it. It's not the fact that I got it. It's not the fact that I'm turning it on. It's the combination, just like Billy was trying to explain. There's a combination of details that has to come together. Well, I have green lights installed under my boat. In combination with where I'm putting the boat, I'm power pulling the boat down on the edges of deep water. I have 12-foot towns, so I'm able to power pull down right on that 10 or 12-foot break, which is adjacent to the deep water. I'm turning my green lights on, which now my boat in the middle of the day, people say, oh, green light in the middle of the day. Well, the boat casts a shadow. So if you actually believe it, if you were to go underwater, my boat looks like an alien ship in the middle of the day because my shadow that's casted from my boat is a green illuminating light, okay? Which draws the plankton, which draws the shad. So my wheels got to thinking about this. And I thought, well, I wonder if I'm drawing in some bait, I wonder if I turn that KVD sounder on. You know, there's a multitude of sounds, a multitude of ranges of what to use. I'm not going to spill my guts too much because it could simplify it for some people that are really sharp out there that do use the KVD sounder. But I can promise you 100% that I've put two and two together. And I'm calling those fish in, just like be coyote hunting. Okay? I'm calling them out of the woods, out of the deep trees, and literally, you can't miss it. We put power poles down the first 5 minutes. There's nothing around us. Within 20, 30 minutes, there's shad flickers. Within an hour, there's gar. At my trolling motor, the bass are coming to me. So that is part of what I'm doing right now, is utilizing today's equipment. The sonars, all the gear, my power poles, all these things are all coming together as tools for me to make this happen. No different than a deer hunter goes out in the woods, puts a tree stand, puts a feeder, puts a game camera. He has a combination of tools to help him fine-tune what he's doing. But again, with total conviction, the KVD sounder is for real. It's for real. There's a lot of different ways that I imagine Kevin Van Dam can tell you he's used it, and he's going to laugh and say, well, yeah, it's for real. I won a lot of money with it. Like I said, it's really unique. So, any questions up to this point of what I talked about? No? Anybody been fishing lately? How's it been?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, we tried some road beds, like you said.
Cool.
We tried the football jigs, but we ended up using some shaky heads.
Shaky head's good too.
And we did we got some good ones. with
Shaky head's
heads.
good too right now. Yep. There's three worms at the. I basically fish a Texas rig worm, a shaky head worm, and a wobble head worm. And the three presentations that I do on that are different from each other. The shaky head's going to stand it up. It's going to make it look like it's feeding head down. A wobble head's going to let a lot of freeness out of the worm. So it can roll, it can wobble. If a fish pulls up on it with the fins going, it's going to have some life movement to it. And then the Texas rig, which by the way, when I Texas rig a big worm, I do not use an EW. Worm doesn't need it. Like a swim bait's got bulkiness, so you want that extra gap so that the hook and plastic don't impede each other. Well, if you put an EWG in a big 12-inch worm, when that worm settles on the bottom, that hook hits and the worm lays on its side. Don't look right. When you drag it, it's got a lot of rollover, it's got a lot of changing presentation. So I use an offset, basically, offset worm hook, and it keeps that Texas rig sleek. So when that bait's dragging bottom, it's truly dragging bottom. It's not having anything get in the way. Doctor, you got something on your mind. Any questions?
Well, I've been fishing, but I caught king salmon.
King salmon. That was cool. I bet you ate some of that too.
Yeah, we did. It was
Good weather.
Yeah, it's very good. Cool.
Fish is a fish if it has fins. I used to guide for an outfit called the Hookup Outfitters, and they had me fly fishing, and I fished for 7 different species of trout. You know, I go from a bass lake to a striper lake to the mountains for trout, and you don't have to be just all about bass. You know, there's crappie, there's all kinds of other fish. That's pretty unique. I've never gone king salmon fishing.
You love it.
Yeah. Did you get any big ones?
Mostly 20, 25 pounds.
Nice. What's the biggest fish that was caught this week? By anybody?
A little under 4.5.
I had an 11-year-old girl catch a 3.5, and she almost had a hyperventilation attack. And 20 minutes later, she caught a 7.11.
Oh, great.
And we literally had to tell her, look, I had to look at the dad and go, okay, hang on. This is cute for the moment, but this is starting to get important. Forget the fish. I've got to stop her from hyperventilating. It's been 2 minutes. We're going to end up having some problems. And we actually had to set her down, and she got dizzy and lightheaded. But to see that, a youngster like that catch fish was pretty neat.
Yeah.
I apologize that I don't have a lot of good content. Anybody who's seen me before knows I'm usually very prepared for it. I believe I have broke my leg. I have fractures in my leg, and I just haven't had the energy that I've needed after I've been done with what I'm doing to put my head down. I will be doing a ton of homework for this sonar stuff. So tell your friends, it's going to be big. I'm not going to ever say I'm going to outdo Mr. Slade Daltrey, because he's the best. He's earned his place here. He's the guy you need to go to if you need your setup, your original setup. You want to learn something in depth if you have any issues. I would like to say that he's okay with me inviting you. If you want to come with more time on the water, you get an hour and a half or so with Slade, and it's your very important part. But you go out and get a lot more time with hands-on scenarios by booking a full day. Obviously in the summer, I don't want you to do that, it's hot. So that's my intention is again, to be very respectful to Mr. Slade, but I want everybody to realize that I too have the abilities above and beyond what's even necessary running those sonars, and I want to start teaching people, showing people what I'm capable of, and that help you out a lot. It's like deer hunting without binoculars. If you're not using your sonars these days on a lake like Wake Forest, it's just a crapshoot. It really is. I'm not saying you can't have some good days. Old schoolers would come out here and have a method that they went through in the 70s and the 80s when there were no sonars, and they'll figure it out. It may take them more time, but you do need to know that. So, all right, I'm gonna probably keep it a little extra short. Believe it or not, we're not gonna run overtime today. We're gonna run undertime. I'm either overtime or undertime. You know. Are there any questions? Anybody have anything specific they wanted to?
Okay, so I'm new to this area, just moved here.
Okay.
Everybody I've listened to and talked to seems to focus on shad as the main bait.
Yes, sir.
On fork. Is there much in the way of crawdad?
Well, absolutely. Don't get too caught up in that, in just the shad. There are two species of shad. There's threadfin shad and there's gizzard shad. There's a time and place that the bass feed on both. We have brim. Right now my best bite is brim. I can go out and throw crawfish color jigs and catch a few. If I switch to brim color jigs, that's where my big fish are coming from. Bass are choosy. They have different times of year that certain food's available. Sometimes something more readily available. For example, I know Billy talked about he was struggling, looking in the water, studying the water. You know what I got from Billy's lesson there was he wasn't just fishing along. Hey Joe, you and soda? He is tentative. He's studying that water. Well, he saw brim beds. Boom. Well, why? Brim beds, simple, easy for bass, bass prey. We have a thing we call it, bass revenge. The bluegills give them a hard time when they spawn. There's nothing that a bass likes better than to go back and go, yeah, buddy, remember me? You know, you could eat my eggs, I can eat you. So let's party. And so that's really where we're still at. We've been hovering at 78 to 82. We have brim spawning coming in. You should see the brim that are out there. The bait fishermen right now, I don't know if you watch any of that, the bait fishermen are killing it on the brim. So better answer to your question, yes. Threadfin shad, gizzard shad. Brim, blue brim, your bluegills, okay? And the other bait that really gets overlooked on Lake Fork is the yellow bass, the barfish. They're already keying in on the barfish. As this barfish bite develops, and it's going to happen pretty quick this year, you start throwing them spoons. There's nothing better than the 3-inch, 4-inch, and 5-inch Lake Fork flutter spoons. They're the magic, and Kelly Jordan's put that on the map. And it's here. It's you can start to see it. If I would, on any one of my spots that I'm fishing right now, just about any one of them, if I was to break out those sabiki rig, I'm going to be catching 2- and 3-inch yellow bass. And that's another Lake Fork secret. That's a seasonal thing. By September, it's all about it. By September, well, they're really eating them yellows.
Hey, tell them what you told me about the fixation of the eyes.
Okay, so here's a few more tips about bass fishing. Perfect, thank you, Kevin. I love you. One of the first things I would want to do, any pro, any good fisherman is going to want to catch first fish. First fish does a lot. Everything from where they come from, angles, depths. When you take a look at that first fish, the best thing to examine are the lips and teeth, okay, and smell the mouth. Okay, it sounds crazy, but if a fish and eye position, okay, the fish cannot just rotate his eyes like you and I all over the place. They actually get in position. So if the fish is targeting up, meaning he's down, feeding up, the angle of those eyes, like my hands here, will be angled up. If they're square, then he's suspending, probably not doing anything. If the angle of the eyes are down, then he's feeding and looking down. So the eyes tell a lot. The teeth. If the teeth are very fine, meaning you can take your shirt and it'll catch your shirt, it means they've been eating bait fish. So yes, shad. Okay. So immediately I get my first fish by accident. I look at that, I can decide what they're on. If those teeth are really matted, hammered down, pressed down hard, they've been eating on the bottom. I've seen Lake Fork fish have red lipstick, it looks like, because they're eating the red clay. So direct answer is that first fish will tell me what's going on a lot. Or sometimes I may have to have another. But those first few fish will tell you the sign. The third and final, which I never thought about until I saw some pro told me, smell. Crawfish and fish smell different. Smell the mouth. Look inside the mouth. You may see tentacles, their tail hanging out. That can really help you narrow down on what they're feeding on. And like Billy said, in the shallow water, you can visually see it. Out deep, I can't. There are times on Fort where you know what a sabiki rig is? It's a little bait rig. There's a lot of times when I'm down there, there's so much stuff. I'll see a ball. That's why I want to do this interpretation on the sonar is going to be huge. Probably the biggest I've ever done. You see a ball go by on the sonar. If I'm on 10 out of 10 other lakes, I can tell you, oh, that was some threadfin. Oh, there goes your gizzards. On this lake, there's balls of everything. Is it baby shad? Is it baby gizzards? Is it baby crappie? Is it baby catfish? What is it? We got balls that come by all the time. So you may think you're on bait, and you're on baby bass, or baby carp, or baby, just because it's a ball, doesn't mean it's bait fish, it's babies. So you have a lot of different colors that those sonars represent. And that content of that color helps, but I have found that on Fort, there's so much of it that I drop a sabiki a lot of times. When I start to see like really cluttered up with a lot of little stuff, I need to know what it is.
What is that?
Sabiki, it's just a little tiny, it's like a crappie, little sissy, tiny little hook on it, little feather. It's called a sabiki rig. You can use it for catching bait in the ocean. But I drop that down, and if it's them yellows, they're on it like that.
So you can drop a crappie bait down there.
You could pretty much drop a little crappie jig, fish form, drop a pretty little mealworm, anything. But you want to know what that stuff is, and especially if the bass are eating on it, because then you know what to match it, and it makes a big difference. Sometimes they're on the crappie. Some of the biggest bass caught in this lake have been caught with crappie fishermen. Why? Because bass follow crappie, because they're lazy. The bigger the bass, stays with the school crappie, and all he wants is
You
one or
drop
two
a
crappie.
rib hook down there with a split shot weight.
Yep. So that's it in a nutshell. Good question. Good question. There's a lot of lakes that you need to know what's available. Some lakes don't even have gizzards. It's just redfin. Almost all lakes are going to have some brim and crawfish. And brim and crawfish are your growth for bass. They'll never ever grow from eating threadfin shad. Not really. That's like you and I trying to fill up on saltine crackers. There's just no protein in there. They can't eat enough. So, good questions. Anybody in this room objected? And I hope I don't start any more fires, but there's a lot of fires going on. Since we're talking about bait, you're the public. Anybody here objected to bait fishing? Using live bait?
No.
Okay. You shouldn't be. You're the public. You have a right to do so. What I do ask is on a lake like Lake Fork that's protected, because we have a 16 to 24 inch slot, just make sure we're doing it right. Like in the ocean, we're using proper circle hooks, so we're not killing fish. We can't keep them, we can't take them home. If we kill an 18-inch fish, we have to unfortunately throw it back and watch it float away. So understanding that, don't let any of, if you do happen to see any of this nonsense about it, don't let it affect you. Everybody does have a right. Just put it in your mind and tell somebody, hey, look, this is okay. Let's just make sure we do it right, so we don't kill a fish. Other than that, do I believe in guides out there doing it? No. I don't necessarily think that that's appropriate. But the public has every bit of right to be out there bait fishing. Nobody should be giving you a hard time about doing that.
If I'm gonna pay you $500, we're gonna fish however I want to.
That's right. And that's the other thing. Even as a guide, I'm gonna go out on a limb. I don't do it, but I believe if a guide he's got a right to do that. If he's doing it appropriately, not killing fish, I'll more respect to him. And if he's really doing it right, in my mind, he'd go out and work for 6 or 7 of those 8 hours with the artificial, teach all he could, and maybe if he had to, pull it out of his back pocket for just a couple. To go out tied to a tree and abuse it all day long, and say, yeah, we read 50 of them today on live bait. Now, to me, if you're not a guide. Public, though, hey, you got a right to do that. Again, just remember, you're doing, more importantly than any of this nonsense about who's okay to bait fish or not, that's not to bother me. What bothers me is, are we doing it right? Are we not harming the fish? As long as we're not harming the fish, I'm okay with it. So, I wouldn't do it. I've had some scenarios where I've had a 90-year-old person or a youngster we're a challenged person, a blind person, a cerebral palsy person. And many times where, like Kevin said, I feel at the end of the day, the guy's saying, I don't give a darn, I'll pay you $500, get me a fish. That's some understandable pressure. That, and since it's so hot, I wanted you guys to know that. Don't feel that you can't do that. That's part of fishing, especially with the youth. Some of these things that you're learning, you're going out on Lake Fork and you're trying to do what Billy said. You went out for 3 hours, you worked as hard as you could, you broke a sweat, didn't come together. Then you said, let's go try McFarland's teaching. You worked for a few more hours and your son said, Daddy, I'm tired, I haven't caught a fish all day. Get some brim and go catch him a few fish at the end of the day, call it a day. Terrific, well done. And that's my point of sharing that. So, all right, any questions? Yes, sir.
Finding a road bed on 2D solar.
Okay.
Well, I know a spot out here, anybody can find it, but as far as finding it on my 2D, am I looking for I guess the hardest?
Well, some of the roads are sooted over a little bit. And not necessarily sooted over, but just sediment. If you have them near creeks and things, you may have them really sootified, covered up from creek flow. But there's a lot of roads that are just out in the middle of nowhere out there, and they do have a lot of sediment on it. So tweaking your graph, not just the sensitivities, but tweaking maybe a different palette. There's a multitude of palettes. Can help you see some of those things that may be hard to find. Very faint in difference. It's actually harder to find road beds with the down scan than it is the side scan. The side scan tends to show you where that road is. It's a lot easier. And that's another thing I'm going to talk about. You know, Billy just talked about fish suspending. These offshore fish pretty soon are going to really start suspending. They suspend in 15, 18 feet of water right above their incline. They won't let the boat go over them. They won't. It's just like me. If I was a boat up here and I start to go over you guys, they're going to scatter. They will not let the boat go over them. So pretty soon here, we're going to have a hard time finding fish. You can go out there, there's nothing there. But if you fish, you'll catch. So in the next probably 2 to 3 weeks, as we do push up into 88, 90 degrees, I find my fish with side scan only, period. Because they won't let the boat go over the top of them. So now all I want to do is use that side scanning to find the pods. And if I get myself with some pods off to 2 or 3 pods off to the right, and 1 or 2, 3 pods off to the left, I know I'm now surrounded by fish, schools of fish. I'm probably okay. I can begin to fish from the center and start working my way out. But you can't find it without using side scan.
Can you see the haystack with sight finders?
With side scan, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I got some cool images. When I show you some of the images, I've got one set of, there's 13 fish that I found with a side scan. You can see the shadows. You can hardly see the fish, but you can see the shadows. You can count the shadows, and the one that's closest to us, you can literally see fish tail. The shadow doesn't lie. A sonar produces or reproduces an image. The shadow does one of 3 things. It casts the image as the image is, it stretches it, or shrinks it and makes it fat. So in this picture, I have these 13 fish. The ones that are farther away are, they're long on the shadows. The one that's closest to us is his perfect shape of a fish, a tailed boot. It's undeniable, totally undeniable. And it's the shadow, not the recast image. So it's perfect. But again,
Do you make any attempt to try to pull fish out of treetops and stuff? Because you hear people catching nice fish in trees, but it's so difficult.
It's
to
very
spot
difficult
on the sonar, and then how do you fish for them?
it's pretty easy to find them with the sonar, but it's very difficult to fish the tops of trees. You're basically going to use like a suspending jerkbait. You're going to use a weightless jerkbait potentially that you've added some weights to. Some of the best things that the guys that do that have really perfected the countdown. So whether they've gone in a swimming pool or whatnot, they just got really mind familiar with, if I count to 10 and I twitch like this and I count to 3, I know that bait is sitting at 18 feet. Their familiarity with where the bait is, and that's the most difficult part. That could actually be a phenomenal bite. Mark Pack's probably the best at that. And he's going to those same fish that I'm calling in using my KVD sounder. I don't get them all to come, but I get some curiosity. He's out there catching them out of those treetops. And that's kudos to that. And he's very good at doing that. He's got a count, and he'll teach you that count. 13 seconds, twitch, count to 5, whatever, depending on how much weight he's put in that soft jerkbait. Yes, ultimately, you want a 50, 60 fish day, find them in the tops of the trees where there's hundreds of them together, and you can really get into them heavy and wreck them. Yep. All right, well, thank you guys, I appreciate you. If there's no more questions, tell all your friends next week, comes the next seminar, 2 weeks from today, we're gonna get into hot and heavy about sonars, interpretations, and a lot more detail. Didn't realize what we use those things for. So, Mike McFarland Fishing, thank you guys, appreciate you. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry, buddy. All right, we got one more guy for y'all tonight. Everybody take a deep breath. One more guy. This is Justin Crawford. Come on, Justin.
We'll see you later.
Justin is somewhat new and unknown. He's been around the lake for a long time. He's a very good friend of mine, and he is a great fisherman. He actually, Justin, has the honor of having caught the biggest fish that I know of anybody. The biggest fish of anybody I know that has caught. His customer, he's been down at Lake Falcon for the last month or so. He had a customer catch 12 what?
12-2.
12-2. So this guy knows big bass. I know he likes to fish offshore. He kind of is a real versatile guy. He does a little bit of both. He gets up there in dirt with me every once in a while and dobs around. But I'm not sure what he's going to talk to you about tonight, but listen up, because this guy knows big bass. Obviously, he's caught the biggest fish I know of this year, so congrats to him on that.
Thank you, Billy.
Get after it, bud. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming out, first of all. And like you said, for the last month and a half, I've been on Falcon. And at the end of the seminar, if anybody on the internet or you guys have a question about Falcon, you're more than welcome. I'll answer those. Today was actually my first day back on Fort, and I'll explain to you guys what I normally traditionally do in July and August, and how I caught my fish today. And in the mornings, like you said, I'm versatile. So in the mornings, I'll start out shallow, and probably around 9:30, 10 o'clock is when I'll push out deep. And I'm just going to talk about the deep bite and what I've been doing out there. It's a lot of graphing, a lot of graphing, you know. Most of the fish we're finding are suspended, and depending on where on the lake you are and the temperature of the water is how far the fish are suspended in the water. So whenever I do find my fish and my bait balls, depending on how high in the water column my baits are stacked is how high I'm going to work this hair jig. And I'm working the hair jig, and I'm also working the spinner bait. And I'll start out talking about the hair jig first. I'm going to put all this stuff up here so I don't keep leaning down. On the hair jig, I'm using 17-pound fluorocarbon line, yellow label Seaguard. And I'm using it on a 7-foot, 6-inch medium heavy rod. I don't want a real stiff action, so I'm not ripping it out of the fish's mouth. And how I was talking about the bait and how far it's stacked up in the water column is how high I'm going to jerk this hair jig. So what I do is I throw it out as far as I possibly can, backing off my bait and my fish. Let it sink to the bottom and so depending, some people they'll let it sink to where they think, you know, right about where they think the fish are sitting in the water. This cat. You're fine, bud. How I do it, I let it sink to the bottom. And then I'll reel my reel up, you know, depending on where the fish are stacked, I may reel up 7 to 10 strokes and get it up in the water column. My fish have been sitting in 12 to 17 foot of water. So most of the time I'm letting it hit the bottom, I'll reel up 7 to 8 times, and then I'm reeling real slow and I'll pop. Let it sink back down, pop. Let it sink back down, pop. And normally on the fall is when I'm getting my reaction. And the reason why I like using the hair jig over crankbaits, I feel like it gets those schools that aren't one to eat fired up faster than a crankbait would, in my opinion. They see the crankbait on fork day in, day out, day in, day out. So the bigger hair jig is whenever I'm seeing bigger bait fish on my graph. And then whenever I know they're eating a little bit smaller is when I'll go down to the smaller hair jig. And, you know, it's about the same type colors. I'll use a chartreuse or a black. Doesn't really matter. As long as it's a shad type color. I don't really use anything in green pumpkin or watermelon as far as my hair jig goes. Now, whenever I know they're eating big gizzard shad or I'm focusing on my big fish is when I'm using a big 1-ounce spinnerbait. And these are made by Oldham. And whenever I'm throwing these, I'm throwing them on the same rod, which is a 7.6 with a 7.31 gear ratio reel. And I'm using 20 pound on this. Because normally I'm getting bigger bites on this and I'm throwing it more around wood. So whenever you do get hung up with that, wrap it around, you have a better chance.
20 pound what?
20 pound Seaguard fluorocarbon. Yes, sir. And then also today we caught most of our fish on the smaller hair jig. And I was focusing on points that are coming out, and I want a good drop off. I want where it goes from 6 to 8 foot and drops off real hard, anywhere from 18 to 25 foot, and they're normally sitting on that drop off. And like I said, depending on where you're at in the lake and the water temperature is depending on where those fish, how far up in the water column as far as the depth goes, where they're sitting. Also caught a few today. Carolina rigging with the Hyper Freak 5-inch worm, and I like the watermelon pearl the best with this. And it's the tail. A lot of people use a fluke, and the bait Glenn showing you works really well too. I just really like the Cinco stick tail style bait better, especially with the jointed tail right here. It just gives that tail a lot more action whenever you're pulling it through the water. And I work my Carolina rigs very, very, very slow. And most of the time I'm fishing these points and focusing on these suspended bass, I'm scooting out and throwing up to the shallow and pulling off instead of pulling back up. But sometimes making that adjustment of pulling up onto the shallow and casting out deep, pulling up, sometimes will actually work better. It all really depends on the wind, to be honest with you. I'm best with people asking questions. I don't have a lot of details, so any questions y'all have, I can do a lot better with that. Yes,
On
sir.
your hair jigs, what are the weight?
Yes, sir. I prefer the 3-ounce, 3/8 ounce, but these are all 1/2 ounce. The 3/8 ounce I feel like has that right
Rate of fall?
rate of fall. Yes, sir. I really do. And that's a big thing. That's a good question. The rate of fall of these hair jigs right now is a big deal, and that 3/8 is what I usually normally go to.
They sell those around the lakes, huh?
Yes, sir. Oak Ridge Marina has them. And these are made by the package for these small ones, which is my most successful. These are Cumberland Pro Lures with a Gamakatsu hook. And the bigger one's made by Hog Farmer. And like I said, if I know that they're chasing those bigger gizzard shad or bigger shad, that's what I'll go to. But most of the time it's this.
Sorry, you don't use any trailer or anything with those, right?
No, sir, not with these. And that's why I like having that medium heavy rod with the fast action tip, is because you don't want it, ripping it out of their mouth. You want to go ahead and make sure they're holding on to it and running off before you set the hook.
I might have missed, what is your technique? Are you stroking it?
Yes, sir. I'm stroking it up and down. And my strokes, depending on my strokes, is how high up in the water column. Like you may have, a big school of gizzard shad that are maybe only this big and sitting this high. Now that, whenever I pull it through and I know they're at that water level, I'll do smaller strokes because you're trying to work it around that in that zone of where the shad are. And the bass may be 5-6 foot underneath the bait ball, or they may be 6 inches underneath it. It just all depends. But most of the time, if you work it close to that bait ball, they'll come up and they usually get it. It's usually on the fall down.
You don't see it on the graph, do you?
Yes, sir. You can on your front graph. Yes, sir. If you're right on top of your bait fishing, you'll see it. You
Well,
can
yeah,
see
if you're
it
jigging straight down.
Yes, sir.
If you're out, how far out before you lose it?
Pretty far up. I mean,
if you're make that long cast
right.
and you're halfway back to the boat, you're not gonna pick it up on your sonar.
No, sir. You won't.
It's gonna
That's why you have to graph and find those areas and know where those bait balls are sitting and how they're sitting before you start fishing it. And then you'll back off. Some people use buoys, and then some people, they have their mapping and they'll know where to throw up to. Any other questions, guys?
On your spinner baits, you usually just, this time of year, you usually just stick with the willow blades?
Yes, sir. I like the willow blades best. At nighttime, whenever I'm fishing which nighttime fishing I do a lot of in the summertime, I'll use the single Colorado blade and the black and blue. But right now, the gold blade willow leaf blades, this is a number 7. And I work these just like I do the hair jig. I'll let them fall, and then I jerk it back up, fall. And when those blades clacking, and also I'll work this sometimes, if I know those fish are on the bottom, I'll work it just like a jig, and I'll let it fall, and I just barely hop it, and that clacking of the blades will usually get them. Around bridge pylons as well, this works very, very well. Work it just kind of like a spoon, you would a spoon.
That's a full ounce?
Yes, sir, a 1 ounce with number 7 blade on the back.
And what's the brand on it?
That's Oldham. Oldham makes this.
I believe you're fixing to start carrying those in your store.
Yes, sir. These, the hair jigs you can find around the marinas, I haven't seen these. I actually found these at in Dallas called Fishing World off of Mockingbird. He carries them. And I'm sure you can get them on Oldham's website.
Yeah, we just called them the other day, and we're gonna set it up here in the stores and do.
Yes, sir. That's good. So they'll be here soon. These are great
We
baits.
really like their jigs anyway.
Yes, sir. They're great. He uses king salmon hooks on all his jigs. I mean, you can't bend these things.
You use trailers on the spinner baits?
Yes, sir, I will. If I'm fishing those river channels where I know there's a lot of wood, I won't, just because these are very expensive and it adds up. But if I'm offshore and I'm not fishing a whole lot of structure, maybe just a river channel swing or some type of drop off, I'll sometimes put that trailer on there. But most of my trailers, it's real small. I'll use like a little stinger hook or something.
Would you talk about trailer hook or trailer?
Well, trailer, actually.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yes, sir. I will have a
Stinger
trailer.
would be the next question.
Yes, sir. Today, this is the one that I was using today, and I caught a few fish on, and I just added this little paddle tail swim bait on the back of it, and I'm working it just like I would a spoon. And that tail just gives it a little bit more action. And sometimes you can dip that in the yellow if you're in a little bit murkier water. Yes, sir.
What's the deepest, I mean, if you're fishing shallow to deep, what's the deepest you're dragging it to? Because I wasn't sure if there's like a thermocline in the summertime where you're just wasting your time under a certain depth.
Yes, sir. It all depends on where you're at in the lake. The furthest I'm dragging out right now is probably in that 23 to 25 foot range, but that's pretty rare. I'm normally sitting right now, like I said, it's my first day back on Fort, but I'm talking traditionally July and August. I'll never really go over 16, 18 foot unless I absolutely have to. And that's normally in August when it gets super, super hot. You'll start finding those groups pushing out a little bit deeper in those river channels. Any other questions, guys? Awesome. Thank you guys for coming out, and also thank Mr. Parker and Lake Fork Trophy Lures for having us out as well. You guys are awesome. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
What was your last name?
Crawford?
Yeah.
Man. You didn't pull no punches. You got out, didn't you?
Man, I hate public speaking, man.
Well, I'm sure you did a good job. Guys, thank y'all very much for coming. 2 weeks from today, we'll do it again. Is there any more last questions? Anybody have anything? No? All right, I guess we'll let you get out of there. Hey, if you want to try that technique I talked about tonight, the magic shads are towards the end of this first aisle on the right-hand side. Pick up the bag, catch a lot of fish. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you.